Hello, everyone. I'm Josh Singer from Clean Energy New Hampshire. I'm the program coordinator for the Local Energy Solutions Work Group. Welcome to today's webinar, Community Power Roadmap, Process Support for Local Energy Committees and Elected Officials. Today, we're going to hear from Henry Herndon, consultant under contract with the City of Lebanon, working in coordination with communities across the state to establish the Community Power Coalition of New Hampshire. We will be talking about community power and how we're going to improve the community power programs throughout the state. In legislative news, HB 315 is working through in a positive way. The HB 315, the progress on it fixes things resolved with the rulemaking. The issues were resolved in the past work group. The PUC is potentially not planning on moving forward with the rulemaking soon, so we're waiting on that. And we'll be getting a policy update this Friday if you are signed up for our emails. I'm going to move forward and introduce Henry Herndon to start the presentation.
Thank you, Josh. To reiterate, the title of today's presentation is Community Power Roadmap, How to Join the Coalition and Approve a Community Power Program. And we're going to be talking about process support for local energy committees and elected officials. And a big thank you to Clean Energy New Hampshire and Local Energy Solutions for all of the great work that they do in the state and for hosting this educational presentation. And thank you to the audience for joining us on today, May 4th, for your lunch break to learn a little bit more about Community Power Coalition, which is a public nonprofit that is being established to empower cities and towns across the state to achieve their respective energy goals through successful implementation of community power programs. Coalition membership is open and available to all cities, towns, and counties in the state. We're going to be learning a little bit more about that organization today and providing some resources for communities who want to move forward with programs. And a theme we'll revisit a bit during the presentation: for communities by communities, really learning about how this new institution is created by some of the leading cities and towns in the state to serve cities and towns in the state. And Josh, I understand that folks are able to type questions in throughout the presentation as we go, and we'll be getting to those at the end. So brief overview of the presentation agenda and next steps. So today's agenda, we're going to have an overview of community power and the coalition. We'll meet the coalition's team and some of the lead experts that have really been driving this coalition model forward in the state. We'll have an update on coalition activities, and we'll dig into the community power roadmap a bit, focusing on 3 core steps: joining the coalition, forming a community power committee, and adopting your community power plan to authorize your program. We will also discuss next steps and opportunities to engage with the peer network of municipal staff and officials that are leading from the coalition to engage with your community and provide educational assistance towards supporting community power programs. And then we will close with a Q&A. This is the first in a series of presentations and community discussions. And to register for those upcoming events, visit www.cpcnh.org/roadmap. And just to preview some of those, we will have an upcoming presentation on Thursday, May 13th at 5:30 p.m. that will include a community discussion to really walk through the details of the coalition's joint action, governance, and business model. That'll be followed by Tuesday, May 25th, a deeper dive into the Joint Powers Agreement. And finally, another presentation, community discussion, providing an overview of the coalition's community power plan template, discussion of the regulatory updates that Josh alluded to, and other process support for cities and towns in New Hampshire. So community power and the coalition. Brief summary, recap: what is community power? New Hampshire cities, towns, and counties can procure electric power supply on behalf of their residents and businesses and provide related services, such as local programs, net energy metering supply rates to really build up that local distributed energy marketplace where we're sourcing our power from our residents and businesses and things of that nature. So community power means pooled power purchasing for energy supply. And it's really a mechanism to enable cities and towns to gain access to competitive markets and through the coalition, access joint risk management for their energy procurements, which can then in turn lower and stabilize long-term energy rates. Communities also have the option to source power locally and build new renewable energy projects to provide power to their community power programs. Utility companies continue to deliver that electric power and own and operate the power grid, connecting generation to load and ensuring reliable electric service. And then finally, communities benefit from value-added programs and services on the retail side of things. And that could include anything from affordable rates to access to green power options to time of use rates and support in implementing local programs for solar, energy storage, electric vehicles, other technologies on the community side of things. Importantly, customers may switch back to their utility supply at any time or take service from another supplier. These programs are in no way mandatory. And the enabling legislation is flagged at the bottom of the screen here, RSA 53E, relative to aggregation of electric customers by municipalities and counties. Digging into the Community Power Coalition, which is a statewide public nonprofit in formation designed for communities by communities. There are a few main benefits associated with the coalition model for community power, starting with streamlined formation and streamlined implementation for community power programs. Coalition members gain access to a statewide network of energy experts and peers that are leading the development of New Hampshire's community power marketplace and gain access to associated technical assistance and resources such as templates for enabling resolutions to join the coalition or form community power committees, electric aggregation plan templates, which we'll talk about a little bit later, and public educational materials. Additionally, coalition members benefit from shared services, including vetting of vendors and service providers on behalf of the collective membership to ensure effective oversight and good governance of programs, active contract and portfolio management of energy procurement to manage risk for customers. And this is an important piece to understand the sort of portfolio piece rather than negotiating a single short-term contract for power, really managing long-term risk through the portfolio model that enables communities to achieve some of their goals that might include integrating longer-term power purchase agreements to build those local renewable energy projects that benefit communities. Finally, local projects and project development. So coalition members benefit from the economy of scale associated with joint power solicitations and enabling community solar plus storage project development. And that's really a priority for the coalition to empower members who would choose to do so to integrate those local energy projects into the portfolio. In summary, phase one of coalition membership is really focused on enabling cities and towns to benefit from peer-to-peer resource sharing across the state and expert support towards approving their programs locally. And then after those programs are approved, phase two, benefiting from the economy of scale associated with shared services in terms of energy procurements, operations, project development, and local programs. Cost sharing. So this is an important question an important point to understand for those communities contemplating community power. Communities do not pay upfront fees to join the coalition and launch community power programs. The costs associated with those programs are recovered from the retail electricity rates that are set by each member after program launch. In terms of the coalition, subsequent to joining the coalition, which is at no cost, communities would be under no financial obligation until the execution of a cost-sharing agreement. Communities may withdraw from the coalition prior to entering into any cost-sharing agreement, and at any point subsequent to that agreement, subject to any existing obligations under the agreement. And importantly, the coalition details and outlines 3 types of costs that could be associated with programs. Firstly, there are member services costs, which could include the complete service bundle, and really a menu of services that members could choose from. And those services would be recovered from members, ratepayers who are taking those specific services. Secondly, direct project costs, which only accrue to those communities who are choosing to participate in that project, which could be, for example, a community solar project. And thirdly, administrative and general costs, which are shared proportionally across members based on their proportional share of annual electric sales. Importantly, these programs are self-funded through the revenue received from participating customers, and each program's launch and operating costs are recovered through electricity sales subsequent to program launch. So how does a community join the coalition? In order to join the coalition, a local governing body votes to adopt the Joint Powers Agreement and then would execute it to join the coalition. Now, the Joint Powers Agreement, this is the contract among local governments where they agree to delegate certain authorities and share them under the new corporate entity that is the nonprofit governmental instrumentality of the coalition. That agreement, which was drafted by a coalition organizing group over the past, in the second half of 2020, has been approved by the Attorney General and has been adopted by Lebanon City Council and Hanover Select Board, while other members of the organizing group, including the City of Nashua and Cheshire County, are undergoing processes to adopt that agreement as well. So we definitely want to flag for folks who are interested in a deeper dive to register for that May 25th event. And the public officials and staff that have been involved in this process are available to engage with peers and counterparts in other communities who are interested in a little hands-on education about this important item. And just to be clear, the Joint Powers Agreement, it is the contract among the communities to share their authorities, but it is also the Articles of Agreement and the corporate bylaws of the new public nonprofit. The Joint Powers Agreement can be downloaded at cpcnh.org on the About page. So for folks who are interested, flag that for review. So joint power in the joint power agencies in the power sector. In designing the coalition, it was really based on best practices associated with joint action in the public power sector. And there's a long history of this across the country. Public utilities and cooperatives have formed over 70 joint powers agencies over the past 50 years, just not currently in New Hampshire. And the design of the coalition for New Hampshire, as we'll talk about in the next couple of slides, is really based on some of the best practices and lessons learned from public power across the nation. Specifically in terms of the community power industry, the community power industry in some of the mature markets and some of the mature models has really embraced the joint action or the coalition model for community power. And we see really robust leadership and innovation occurring in those marketplaces that have embraced the coalition model, the joint action model, whether it's in California or in the Midwest or New York. And there's a really great example, actually, Cape Light Compact in Massachusetts, that has been doing this for quite some time as well. So all of these lessons learned from some of the leading regions of the country have been applied in thinking about how to implement the coalition model or the joint action model here in New Hampshire. All right, we're gonna shift a little bit and dive into some of the experts who have been involved in developing Community Power Coalition, and primarily the organizing group. The coalition organizing group, or its founding members, includes staff and officials from Lebanon, Nashua, Hanover, Cheshire County, and in collaboration with other communities across the state. And we have some of those leaders here on the screen: Clifton Below, Assistant Mayor and City Councilor for the City of Lebanon; Doria Brown, City of Nashua's Energy Manager; Rod Bouchard, Cheshire County Assistant County Administrator for Special Projects and Strategic Initiatives; and then from Hanover, Town Manager Julia Griffin and Sustainability Director April Salas. I'm going to take a little bit of time to talk a little bit about some of the key leadership that has gone into this approach. Starting with Clifton Below, Assistant Mayor and City Councilor for Lebanon. Clifton Below has many years of energy policy leadership and expertise here in New Hampshire. And in addition to being the primary author of the Community Power Act from 2019, Cliff has a long history dating back to when he was in the House of Representatives and co-authored the nation's first Electric Utility Restructuring Act, along with other partners, bipartisan partners across the State House. And Clifton has served as a House Representative, a Senator, and a Public Utilities Commissioner. And the reason, part of the importance of highlighting this leadership is to emphasize that in terms of the power sector and power sector evolution and innovation, it's important to have a really deep understanding of not only legislative processes, but also regulatory processes. And this is extremely rare and extremely valuable in the power sector. And just recently, we discussed a little bit about House Bill 315, but some of the recent coalition activities include leadership on legislative policy, including defending community power authorities in terms of the House Bill 315 engagements, and more recently Senate Bill 91, which we'll talk about a little bit more in an upcoming slide. Clifton has also been a leader in drafting the regulatory rules and engaged in the statewide data platform development, which is a related docket at the Public Utilities Commission. The coalition has also benefited and continues to benefit enormously from the expertise and experience of Samuel Golding, who is the president of Community Choice Partners. Samuel's got a long history of expertise in the power sector in terms of designing and really evolving the community power operating and governance models. And Samuel's been a key part of the team in thinking really critically about how do we take all of the lessons learned from across the nation and sort of try to leapfrog some of the more basic or simplistic models of community power towards a mature model that is really gonna drive power sector innovation in the way we see that occurring in some of the leading parts of the country. Finally, in terms of legal expertise, Michael Postar, president and shareholder of Duncan Weinberg Genzer in Pembroke. So in the summer of 2020, the City of Lebanon, in partnership with Hanover and the other members of the coalition's organizing group, issued a request for qualifications for legal services to support the development of the Joint Powers Agreement and formally established the coalition. Out of 6 respondents, Duncan Weinberg Genzer and Pembroke was selected, and the coalition organizing group proceeded to work with the firm and President Michael Postar to apply some of those national best practices in designing the Joint Powers Agreement for the coalition. Duncan, Weinberg, Genzer, and Pembroke it has been around for 50 years, and they have a core focus on utility, energy, and municipal law. And they have a long history of working in the public power sector, working with locally owned utilities or municipal utilities, cooperatives, power agencies of that nature, and more recently really working in the community power space as well across the country. Shifting to talk a little bit about some of the recent activities of Community Power Coalition. In terms of public advocacy, this is a key aspect of some of the thinking that's gone into the design of the coalition model. And already we've seen that the ability of a coalition approach to community power can enable communities to expand their local control authorities in state policy issues. In terms of House Bill 315, just briefly recap. At the beginning of this legislative session, there was a bill introduced that would have really undermined most of the authorities outlined in the community power law. And as a result of the coalition's leadership, communities across the state were able to come together and work hand in hand to defend that legislation and actually expand community power authorities. More recently, and I'm going to talk about this on the next slide, Senate Bill 91 is another important policy issue that coalition leaders are working very hard on, and that's all about creating a marketplace for community scale energy generation projects in the state at the 1 to 5 megawatt level, and creating a marketplace where communities can benefit from developing energy projects in the state to lower transmission costs and supply their communities with local renewable power. Coalition has also been very active in the Public Utility Commission rule drafting proceeding, and there was I believe just this week or perhaps last week, the Public Utility Commission in their statewide energy data platform docket, there was a settlement proposal submitted, and partners, including Clean Energy New Hampshire and many other partners across the state, worked with members of the coalition and utilities to put forward this settlement agreement to create a statewide energy data platform that will be democratically governed, and that is a critical sort of analogous piece to the energy policy puzzle that can support modernization and innovation in renewable energy in New Hampshire. So a key benefit of the coalition model is really its ability to empower communities across the state to speak with one voice and lead positive change through effective public advocacy. And there's a lot that is being done by some of the key members of the team, but really the strength comes from being able to engage many communities across the state and elevate their voices. So there's a lot of text on this slide. I'm going to try to move through it fairly quickly. But just to sort of summarize some of the activities that have been going on recently and some of the things we're looking forward to in terms of community power. We've talked a bit about some of the legislative pieces protecting and expanding community power authorities. Senate Bill 91, I'll just take a moment on this just to reiterate for folks. So Senate Bill 91, Part 4 in particular, would enable a statewide marketplace for generators up to 5 megawatts. And it's an alternative to some of the net metering fights we've seen in the state. We know there's an enormous amount of demand from cities and towns for projects in the 1 to 5 megawatt range, and there is currently no policy mechanism to enable those projects. Senate Bill 91 would be that policy mechanism and would do so in a way that would reduce costs for everyone by reducing transmission costs. So yesterday at the legislative work session on this bill, Clifton Below presented to the Science, Technology, and Energy Committee, and that presentation was favorably received. And we are cautiously optimistic that we may get progress and we may get this piece of legislation moved forward this session as well. And I believe that bill is sponsored by Senate Majority Leader Jeb Bradley. So sort of moving down the slide a little bit, we've talked a little bit about some of the regulatory issues, rule drafting, data platform. The coalition recently put together a new website, which folks are encouraged to visit. There's a lot of really good information there. And lots of engagements with communities who are interested in learning about the coalition and beginning their processes to become a part of this statewide movement. And part of the point that is important to understand here, there's been a lot of activity from coalition members and its affiliated network of allies across the state, many of whom I understand are represented in today's audience. So there's a lot that has been accomplished. But some of those key successes, particularly the House Bill 315 story, they're really made possible by rallying the support of allies across the state. So this coalition model, it's about making communities stronger together. And that empowerment, it goes both ways in terms of as communities join the coalition, they gain access to resources and expertise and some of the lessons that I've learned by some of the folks that have gone first. But they also give the coalition greater strength in terms of achieving these victories, moving forward progressive energy policy at the State House that has bipartisan support, and building that structure towards developing a robust New Hampshire energy marketplace. Okay, community power roadmap. I'm going to highlight 3 key steps for folks here in terms of the process for implementing a community power program. So we've talked about the coalition and we've talked about joining that network of peer statewide leaders by adopting the Joint Powers Agreement. And I don't know that I mentioned, but an important piece of the coalition's governance structure is that it is governed by the cities and towns that create it. So each member who adopts the Joint Powers Agreement and joins would appoint a representative to the coalition's board of directors. And we've talked a little bit about some of the resources that are available there. Number 2, establish a community power committee. So local governing bodies, in order to implement community power, will establish a committee, and that committee would be responsible for drafting the community power plan. I know that a number of communities on this call and across the state have already taken that step. Sometimes it's referred to as an electric aggregation committee. And there are resources and support available to the communities that have moved forward with that or that are interested in moving forward with establishing a committee. Finally, just highlighting number 3 here on the slide, approving the community power plan. So in order to launch a program, the city council or town meeting or the legislative body of a community would approve the community power plan. And as I flagged earlier, there will be forthcoming presentations that really dig deep into the coalition's template electric aggregation plan and the support that is available to customize that plan in accordance with local policy goals and the respective context of each community. Okay, moving into next steps and how communities, the support that is available to communities moving forward. So for those cities and towns out there that want to take the next steps towards community power, there's a lot that's available to you. So first and foremost, you're invited to schedule a meeting with coalition municipal staff and officials. So connect with coalition members to learn about their experience and their perspective to gain sort of a more hands-on understanding of the process. You're also invited to schedule a joint powers agreement consultation we'll have that presentation coming up for sort of a broader audience, but Michael Postar and members of the coalition's organizing group are available to connect with other communities to have a little bit of a more personal deep dive into the Joint Powers Agreement to understand all of the aspects of that. Folks are available to schedule presentations or support in terms of educating elected officials, city councils, select boards. And we've seen a number of communities around the state begin to move through their processes of preparing recommendations to city council and select board to both review and vote on the Joint Powers Agreement and form a community power committee. And finally, for those communities that do have electric aggregation committees or community power committees established, members of the coalition are available to connect with those communities to consult on the community power plan and make available the template community power plan that the coalition has developed. I'll just flag again for folks the 13th, the 25th, and then June 10th, going deeper into the operating and governance models, going deeper into the Joint Powers Agreement, and then finally going deeper into that community power plan, our upcoming engagements. And you can register at the link in the slides, and these slides will be shared with the audience. So with that, I think we're going to wrap up. And I do understand that Clifton Below is on the call, and Josh, I think we were going to open up his mic in case he wanted to join in some of the Q&A and discussion. And looking forward to answering any questions that the audience may have. Thanks a lot.
Hi, everybody. I just unmuted Cliff. If he wants to unmute himself, he can talk about things that he wanted to discuss.
Hello, everyone. That's all. I'll wait for the questions. We're just excited that there's so much interest and appreciate y'all taking time out of your day for this. For me, this feels like something I've been working on for decades at this point. But I think it's really exciting to see the pieces start to come into place, and I hope New Hampshire can set a really good model of how we can move towards democratizing our choice of energy supply and start to accelerate some of the sort of help support and work with utilities to complete grid modernization or move it forward and start to enable the kind of transformation that a lot of us see as necessary to make our whole energy system more sustainable and renewable. Thanks.
Thank you, Cliff. I'll read off these questions to you, or if you have access to the questions in your panel, I can make you a presenter if you'd like, but I'm not sure if it'll kick anyone else off. Can you see the questions, or should I read them off?
I don't see any questions or chat here.
Yeah, if you could just read them off, Josh, that'd be great.
And I don't know if you can bring in, let everybody show their faces if their cameras are on, but that might be nice so we can see each other. But if not, that's okay.
I have the list of questions, so we can do that. All right. The first question here from David Lavoie is, what is the status of the NHPUC approval of DE 20092 or the Energy Efficiency Plan?
I don't think we know the answer to that. I think it's still sitting in limbo. Hopefully the appointment of a third commissioner might help move things along, but that's just speculative.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's a good question. And part of how it relates is that I think it's been frustrating for a lot of communities to see sort of the disruption in the stop-start in terms of funding for energy efficiency. I live in Concord. I'm on the Concord Energy Committee. A lot of great folks on the Concord Energy Committee put together a Weatherize campaign to promote the residential energy efficiency, and those programs got frozen because of the delay in funding. But what we see in mature community power markets is these joint action agencies through the coalition model are developing programs where they're generating revenue to pay for the operations and to pay for a reserve fund, and using that model to then reinvest into their communities in terms of local programs, in terms of creating opportunities for folks to adopt, whether it's building energy efficiency upgrades or distributed energy resources that are helping to shape load and produce more power locally. There are opportunities for community power through coalition model to really be a revenue generator to then reinvest into local infrastructure projects, to complement and supplement some of those investments we see coming from energy efficiency programs.
Thank you, Henry. The next question is, will this recording be on the CPCNH website? And if so, when? We'll have the recording right after this, and I'm not sure if Henry's going to post it or I can put it on the LES work group website.
Yeah, we could do both, Josh.
Okay.
Happy to do that.
So there you go. It should be, I'd say it'll be up by next week at the latest. What is the ideal composition of a community power committee, and how would it relate to or interact with a local energy committee commission? From Chris Gogland.
That's a great question.
Yeah.
You want to take a stab, Cliff?
I'll start. Sure. In our case, in our city's case, because the idea kind of originated out of our energy committee, which is called the Lebanon Energy Advisory Committee. We went and made a recommendation to the city council to name us as the city's electric aggregation committee under the statute. So that was a formal step under the statute as it existed at the time. So conveniently, the Lebanon Energy Advisory Committee is also the Lebanon Electric Aggregation Committee, same acronym. So we're one and the same. That's one option. Your community's governing body under the statute creates an aggregation committee, which in this slide deck we're referring to as your community power committee. That could be an existing committee, or it could be a subcommittee of that, or it could be an all new group, particularly a community that maybe doesn't have an energy or climate or sustainability committee. I think Hanover did it as a subgroup of their Sustainable Hanover, which is a formal town committee. So all these are options. I think the composition-wise, it's good to have a mixture of both citizens who are interested in these issues, but ideally some people who've been involved with local government. Ideally, it'd be nice to have somebody from your council, or perhaps a select board member, or could also include a staff member, planning board department member who's assigned to the committee. In Hanover's case, the town manager's been very active, and their public works director. So it really varies, what your community, where the interest is, and where there's a few people willing to put some time into the project. I guess that's what I'd say.
Yeah, I think I just have a little bit to add to that. I think that was a great description. One of the interesting aspects of community power is there are a lot of different skills that can contribute to the process in terms of, there's the technical energy wonkery, and there's a lot to be had there, and that's really great, and some folks have a lot of skill there. And then there's the community facing education, because for towns, you're going to have to go to town meeting, and you're going to have to really inform people about how this is a great opportunity to lower costs, to have more renewable energy. And part of the coalition approach is really, in addition to the board of directors, the coalition is very much focused on organizing, the statewide network and committees associated with the different components of this, whether that's community engagement and sharing public education materials in that way. So folks who have community engagement or communication skills definitely are valuable members of local committees, as are folks who are more on the technical side or have specific professional expertise in the power sector or risk management or things of that nature. So that's all I'd say on that.
Thank you. From Michelle Scott, we have, can several very small towns work together or with other towns to form a community power plan?
Great
Yes.
question. The answer is yes.
And a specific about that is the Community Power Coalition is not really intended to be like a large statewide community power program, but rather support and technical, operational support. Can provide the services so communities don't have to have their own staff people to do this. We expect a lot of the work will be through third-party vendors that already have extensive background in the relevant areas, whether that's managing a supply portfolio or doing the electronic data interchange with the utilities, things of that sort, customer service support. All of that we expect for vendors to be supporting. I think I lost track of the question.
Yeah, just to jump in real quick.
Sure.
So I think what you're getting at, Cliff, is the coalition is not a singular aggregation, but a couple of small towns could come together, form a single committee, work towards a single plan for that region, and then that regional community power program could join the coalition and access its operational services to run the program. It is provided that the coalition can have regional community power programs as members.
Right, exactly. So instead of and the statute specifically provides that instead of an individual town doing a plan on their own, you could have a joint committee. If all your governing boards support it, you could have 3 or 4 towns create a joint committee with representatives from each town, and they would collaboratively develop an aggregation plan. And of course, we have a template that can actually do a lot of that work for you. You just kind of need to customize the template, and then you can actually, the kind of model JPA that we have could be adapted for a multi-community actual aggregation where you work as if you're one source of supply and one program, where as a group you sort of set your priorities, whether that's the lowest cost or having higher renewable options or whatever. That's definitely an option. And when you look at the slide that had a lot of the California CCAs, in California, most of the community aggregations have been through joint power entities, but now they've also, at the top and bottom of that group, they also have a statewide super agency, which is sort of more what we're like. California Community Power is intended to provide shared services to the individual. In California, they call them CCAs, community choice aggregations, but it's the exact same concept. So yeah, you can do it either way.
Thank you, Cliff. The next question comes from Louis Hitzera. Besides lower transmission costs, are there any other advantages from SB 91? And who establishes the price of energy generated by a local solar array?
Well, Senate Bill 91 has several components. It's a new approach the Senate has taken to creating omnibus bills where they have basically bipartisan consensus on legislation. So it started off as 5 or 6 bills clumped into one. But 2 of the important remaining pieces, there's a couple that are kind of specific to address specific issues, parts 2 and 3. But part 1 includes sort of a storage bill of rights in it. It is something Senator Waters has been working on for several years, and Clean Energy New Hampshire, to really enable storage for customers to be able to use storage and use it to help shave peak loads, which has multiple values. Transmission costs, ultimately it can help manage distribution costs if we shift load off peak, as well as supply costs, including what's called the capacity tag, which everybody, part of your energy cost is paying for capacity through the forward capacity market that pays generators simply to be available when demand is high, and ISO New England can call on them because maybe they don't run most of the time because they're there for peak demand. So the bill does a couple important things. It really has this important step forward in enabling battery storage at the local level, at the customer level. But part 4 of the bill takes that and creates a local market for local generation and storage, battery storage, other kinds of electricity storage. It enables them to sort of buy and sell locally, if you will, sort of like farm to table, either direct from producer to consumer or from producer to local supplier. So the idea is that right now, if you're somewhere between 1 and 5 megawatts, your only real choice is to register with ISO New England, which you can do. It's a voluntary option. And then you participate in the wholesale, interstate wholesale market. But there's somewhat limited value there for small generators. They may not be able to have their capacity value recognized. They may be settlement only, what's called settlement only generators. To make a long story short, it's sort of creates a technical fiction as if you're like generating locally, but you're going through this central New England exchange, based in Massachusetts, and it comes back to be used locally. Where in fact, these smaller projects like net metering basically offset load right locally. So the important part of Senate Bill 91, from my point of view, is part 4, as well as part 1. But part 4 would enable a community power aggregation serving as a load serving entity, possibly through the coalition, or alternatively, just a competitive supplier could do this as well. They could either buy from a local project and turn around and sell that to retail customers, or even enable a retail customer to contract directly for a strip of power from, say, a community solar and storage project. And in doing so, because if it's just offsetting load locally on the distribution system, the bill also provides that they could get credit for avoided transmission costs, because if they produce when transmission costs are incurred, which is the hour of highest demand called coincident peak in each month of the year, that's what the region's transmission costs are charged back to distribution utilities. So if you can shave that peak demand, function as what's called a load reducer from ISO New England's point of view, then you can actually help lower those costs and get credit for it. And then there's also going to be value in terms of shaving the capacity tags that are assigned to New Hampshire customers as well as perhaps lower the demand to have to build more transmission and generation just to meet peak demands, because on average we're only using about less than 60% of the capacity in the system. So that's a big issue in terms of controlling costs, shifting load off peak.
Just one more thing real quick before the next question is part of the critical piece of that bill is that it's creating a marketplace where you can have bilateral contracts. So the price is set by a negotiated price between the buyer and the seller of the power, which is an important distinction from net metering. And I think it's an attractive policy solution because it's a market-based price, just whatever the buyer and the seller agree upon, as opposed to a price that's set by government regulation.
Right, and in sort of preparing for this, we've talked with a number of large local businesses who have sustainability goals, and they said they'd be very interested if they could do a purchase power agreement for a piece of the power from local projects. And we're, for instance, trying to develop a landfill gas to energy project that would be more than the city government itself uses across all of its accounts. So we could use group net metering, but we'd actually like to use this new legislation to negotiate a purchase power agreement with off-takers. And eventually someday, once we get our Lebanon community power established, maybe we can start to work in some of these resources as part of a portfolio of resources. but you want to go into that very carefully so you don't lock into rates that are too high such that you might lose customers. So that's part of where the professional sort of risk management and power supply management comes in as very important, so that these decisions are made professionally and competently, and that's what we're striving to achieve, something that works for the long term, not just sort of a flash in the pan. Oh, that was nice, we saved some money for a year or so, but it doesn't necessarily persist.
Thank you for that very in-depth response. I'm going to go through the next couple ones. We only have about 10 minutes left. So if you would like to come on to ask more questions or have more, want to talk more about this, we also have the next webinar and a community discussion that will be happening next week. The next question is from Joanna Scharf. Is there a cost to a town to adopt the Joint Powers Agreement? And is there a cost to join CPCNH in the pre-approval stages?
There's no cost to join. I think the one cost that you might incur, it's discretionary, is a legal review of the contract. And that's considered an incidental expense that would kind of come out of your legal, your existing legal fund. The DWGP that worked with us on this also had New Hampshire local counsel that they subcontracted with to assist us in developing the JPA and the organizational documents. And so Nashua, for instance, is one of these communities that has in-house attorneys, an in-house legal department. And so they, Doria Brown, their energy manager, was a little concerned that the Nashua lawyers might have some issues after we'd worked the whole thing out, but they reviewed the whole document and their response was, this is good to go. This is a complete, thorough document. And in the case of Lebanon and Hanover, Hanover's legal counsel looked at it, but we directly engaged DWGP to assist in this development. So we had confidence that the whole thing was good. And as Henry mentioned, part of the law in New Hampshire 53A about joint power agreements requires that the New Hampshire Attorney General review the agreements before they can go into effect, and to make sure that they are entirely in conformity with New Hampshire law. And that review was done, and the AG's office signed off and said, this is good to go. So the only real cost would be a legal review if you wanted to do that, but there's no cost to actually join. And I suppose the only cost would be an investment of time for somebody to serve as a representative to the organization. But that's how we've been doing things. We were fortunate that our city manager was prescient and saying we need to get some grant funds to help fund this startup, and we did that. But we've essentially decided to use those grant funds to help launch this for everyone. So that's sort of why we're, Henry's working with us and Samuel, because we had some non-taxpayer grant funds to get us this far and keep us going for a bit.
Thank you, Cliff. Next question from Michelle Scott is, how would community power protect communities from power failures like what happened in Texas?
Yeah, good question. I think part of that's the advocacy role. Right now, most communities have no visibility into the policies that might affect something like that. We would, as an organization, have more of a seat at the table. If we become a load-serving entity, we'd actually participate with ISO New England. That's sort of at the macro level. Without going into detail, there's a lot of things that have been done differently in New Hampshire than in Texas that really protect against what happened in Texas. But without going into that, I would say the other thing that might happen over time, this wouldn't be right off the bat, but it may be possible to develop more local resiliency and microgrids that could be stood up if you had enough local generation and storage, and we worked with our distribution utility partners, as is being done in some states, to actually develop areas of the distribution grid that could be stood up as a microgrid in an emergency situation. Say we had a really bad ice storm or hurricane and we had prolonged power outages. We already have these sort of microgrids now. Your city hall or your police station or fire department, they may be able to operate on emergency generation. I think one thing that certainly in California that they're doing and that could be part of the what we develop over time is that kind of more of that local resiliency where we could have somewhat larger microgrids that would support other critical services because we have more local generation and storage that can kind of balance things that doesn't really exist today.
Thank you. Yeah. From Dory Drockman, do we know where the governor stands on SB 91?
No, I can't say that I do know. I know that on the equivalent of Part 4, the governor's office officially took a neutral position, neither for nor against. This Part 4 that we're primarily advocating for is the Senate sponsors include the Senate Majority Leader, the chair of the committee, and the other ranking Republican on the committee, as well as the ranking Democrat on the committee. So it had complete bipartisan support in the Senate. We're hoping we get a bipartisan vote out of the House. It is based on a bill that a year ago the governor did support. So we're guardedly optimistic that if it goes to the governor, he'll either sign it into law or let it become law.
Thank you. From John Tabor, would a community utility be able to offer more net metering benefit to a home solar installation than Eversource?
That might be possible. When we get towards the end of this series, and as they become publicly posted, you'll see from our template aggregation plan that a deep discussion around net metering. It's right now it's in the appendices. There's sort of a summary in the main document, but that I'll use up all the remaining time if I go into any detail. But yes, that's one thing that we're definitely looking at: how to both accommodate net metered customers as part of community power aggregations, but even potentially add more value to the proposition.
And Cliff, I wonder if it would be fair to say that perhaps some of the advocacy role of the coalition and then the utility partnerships piece of things in terms of if there are regulatory barriers, removing those regulatory barriers and working in partnership with utilities to move forward grid modernization initiatives that include upgrading electric metering infrastructure to have smart meters so we can actually understand how load is produced and consumed out on the grid in more real time and develop rates and pricing associated with those. That could all play a role in better compensation models for net metering. Is that accurate?
That's fair to say. And in fact, here locally, we've been engaging with Liberty on precisely some of those same questions. It's good to have more of a collaborative relationship that has developed between the city and Liberty Utilities.
Thank you.
Squeeze in another quick question, Josh?
One last question from Antonio. Who would you recommend be on the Community Power Committee?
Henry, you want to recap that?
Yes. In terms of this slide?
No, the local Community Power Committee. Maybe that question was also asked early on, but it was pointed out that a diversity of perspectives is helpful. People have any sort of interest or technical experience in the energy, electricity sector, obviously valuable, but also people who know something about public communication, perhaps a conservation committee member or planning board committee, But people who are business people are nice to have, who are interested, who maybe somebody who represents a business that has sustainability and climate action goals. Anyone who's interested can have a role in helping advance this.
Thank you. Sorry we couldn't get the last couple questions. If you didn't get your question answered, feel free to email me or Henry with those questions. Our emails are on the invite that was sent out. This webinar will be posted to the Local Energy Solutions Work Group page and the Community Power Coalition page. We have the next webinar coming up in, I think it's 2 weeks, and a community discussion next week. With any questions or comments, again, please email me or Henry, and have a great day. Thank you for coming.
Thanks, Josh.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Cliff. Thank you, Henry.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Have a good day.